I've been working in this space now for 3 decades. We've been working very hard to find treatments for people who have Alzheimer's disease, for people who are going to get Alzheimer's disease. But I'm not going to talk about that tonight. I'm going to talk about something else. So I just want to thank our study participants, our funders, my collaborators. And so first I want to talk about disease prevention. And then I want to introduce you to the studies that I've been doing for the last 25 years. We'll talk about what's in an aging brain, the concept of neural reserve. We'll talk about things that increase or decrease your brain's vulnerability to losing cognition. And then we'll end with things you might be able to do. So we'll just start with this. Something's not right. These are 2 cavemen. Something's not right. Our air is clean. Our water is pure. We all get plenty of exercise. Everything we eat is organic and free range. And yet nobody lives past 30. I also get to share some of the slides that some of the pictures that my son drew for me. Here's an old one. Did you ever ask yourself, where do old people come from? There didn't used to be a lot of old people, but now they seem to be everywhere. So how do you make an old person? So you start by making a little person, and you wait. Sometimes you got to wait a long time. So I'm not going to go back to cavemen, but I am going to go back to 1900. Life expectancy in 1900 was about 47. 47. Not a lot of people had Alzheimer's disease at 47. If you die without Alzheimer's disease, you do not get it. It works every time. Not the intervention I'm personally hoping for. But people were dying young. And what happened was, with clean water, housing, and sanitation in the first half of the century, people stopped dying young. And what happened was they started to die more from diseases of middle to late life. And in that case, late life being 60s. Antibiotics introduced in 1941. Therapies for high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease really didn't come online until the 60s and 70s, when we saw this dramatic reduction in mortality from cardiovascular disease. We've also seen similar reductions, not quite as dramatic, in mortality from cancer. So if you don't die in childhood, and you don't die from cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart disease, or cancer, you can get old. And what we see now is the fruits of our labor of preventing death in young ages is you have this rapidly increasing number of people with all kinds of age-related conditions, with Alzheimer's disease being just one of them. And who gets Alzheimer's disease? Well, really, anyone and everyone. Yeah, we can find certain groups that are at slightly greater risk, but we're all at risk. If you are at risk of getting old, you are at risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. And yet, not everybody gets it. Some people can get very old and be very functional. This is Grandma Moses, painted this picture at age 90. Michelangelo was working on his Rondinini Pieta at the age of 90. I want to be able to do that when I'm 90. In fact, I'd like to be able to do that at any age. So I have a question. Would you rather A, get Alzheimer's disease and treat it, or would you rather never get it at all? Who wants A? Nobody? No takers? Oh, come on. There you go. Thank you. Okay, and who would just prefer not to get it? All right. Okay, So let's talk about it. How are we going to prevent Alzheimer's disease? Well, Alzheimer's disease is a disease of the brain. Things happen to your brain and you lose memory. And they can be risk factors for changes in the brain, and they can be factors that alter how your brain responds to bad things that happen. Remember, your brain does not wish to be demented. I will give you a moment. Ask your brain. So it has all kinds of ways of fighting things going wrong with it, just like all physiologic systems. So now I want to move into these two studies that we've been doing. The first one is called the Religious Order Study. It started in 1993. I guess I'm showing my age. We've recruited over 1,300 older nuns, priests, and brothers from across the United States. They enroll in the study without dementia. They agree to be tested every year. And a condition of entry is that they must agree to give me their brain when they die. If they don't agree to give me their brain, they can't be in the study. They come from all over the country. We actually have a group in Los Altos, California. We branched out originally for men. We have 3 African-American Catholic religious groups. We've translated everything into Spanish, and we recruit Latino sisters in San Antonio. So I pack up a team and fly them around the country every year. And I want to thank you, because you pay for it through your generous donations to the NIH. Well, somebody takes your taxes and gives some to the NIH. And there's a lot of nice things about working. This is the one in Los Altos. They live communally. They don't have family members to interfere with their wishes to donate their brain. We know how to follow them. We know where they're going to be next year. We can always find someone that can find them. And those are the headstones in the backyard. Some of these places have the headstones in the front yard. And so it really facilitates getting the brains. So I'm sorry, but if you study diseases of the brain, one way to do it is to study the brains. Lucky you, I'm not here asking for your brain today, which is how I spend most of my days. And here's some of our participants. In 1997, we started another study with lay people. It's called the Rush Memory and Aging Project. This has 1,800 older people from across northeastern Illinois. Similar, they enroll without dementia, agree to be tested every year, and everyone in this study donates not only their brain, but their entire spinal cord, muscle, and nerve. So we can actually study not only the most common things that people worry about, which is losing cognition when they get older, but the second most common thing, which is losing the ability to get from one place to another under one's own power. People don't want to not remember, not plan, and people don't want to be dependent on other human beings to get from one place to another. So we can study the full range of motor function and gait. And in both studies, a lot of people have actually developed these diseases. If you want to know what causes Alzheimer's disease, you have to get people that don't have it, and then some people have to get it. Okay? If you're taking a medication to prevent heart attack or stroke, things like medications for high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or diabetes, okay, we know those medications work because people were in studies, right? And some of them had to get stroke or heart disease. So here is Rush University on the near west side of Chicago, and here are a bunch of sites that we work with. We work with a lot of continuous care retirement centers, but we also work with a lot of social service agencies and subsidized housing to get a full range of racial and ethnic minorities and socioeconomic status. Clue you in, this is Wisconsin, this is Lake Michigan, this is Indiana, and this is California. Here's some of the CCRCs, or continuous care retirement centers we work with. This must have been when I said brain donation, because this guy grabs his head. Not till you're done. No brain before it's time. So Y'all going to dinner after this? I'll give you a little show and tell. What do you see inside a brain? Well, first let's look at the outside of a brain. This is Alzheimer's disease. This is a normal-looking brain. This one, we remove the brain stem. And what you see is the brain is shrunken. You can see it's shrunken. If I cut through it, you can see really that it's shrunken. There's three things inside your skull. There's brain, there's spinal fluid, and there's blood. If you take out brain, you have to put something else in, preferably spinal fluid and not blood. And so you can see these big fluid-filled cavities and cavities out here. All right. The brain very visibly shrinks in somebody that has Alzheimer's disease. It's not subtle, but it's not specific either. Brains shrink for a lot of reasons. So this is the classic brain lesions that you see in Alzheimer's disease. It uses a silver stain, very similar to what Dr. Alzheimer would have used 100 years ago, a little bit more than 100 years ago. And there's a lot of ways to look at this pathology. This is an infarct or a stroke. Stroke is the clinical event. Infarct is the lack of blood supply to the brain. That's a big one. That's a little one. This is atherosclerosis. This is arteriolar sclerosis. This is what you get from this thickening here from chronic high blood pressure. And this is a disease called Lewy body disease, which is really Parkinson's disease that gets into the part of the brain that involves thinking. Hippocampal sclerosis, TDP-43. I didn't name it, but that's its name. And by about age 85, it is hard to find a brain that does not have at least some pathology of Alzheimer's disease. More than half of brains have these infarcts, the things that can cause strokes. About 20% have Parkinson's disease. About half have something called frontotemporal lobar dementia with this TDP-43, and about 10% have hippocampal sclerosis. And in a lot of old people, they have 2 or 3 or 4 of these things. So people with Alzheimer's disease in their 30s, 40s, 50s often have just Alzheimer's disease. But people with Alzheimer's disease in their 80s and 90s often have lots of stuff going on. So traditionally, we have focused on finding things that are related to these amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles, the pathology of Alzheimer's disease, as if we want to get rid of that. And most of what we found are genetic. So there's mutations in 3 genes that actually cause this pathology. There's changes in the genes that are called polymorphisms that can cause this pathology. But we were interested in, can we find lifestyle factors? And it turns out that the vast majority of risk factors for Alzheimer's dementia are not related to anything we've measured in the brain. So let's talk about this idea of neural reserve. If I take a cup full of Alzheimer's pathology, 150 cups, and we pass it out, and you pour it in your head, each one of you, not recommending this, but just the thought experiment. If you pour it in your head, do you think it's going to have the same effect on each person? No, of course not. So just tell that to Alzheimer's researchers, will you please? It's really a simple concept. Our brains are different. Our brains are different. So our ability to withstand the effects of Alzheimer's pathology in the brain is different. Each one of us is different. Same amount of brain pathology doesn't result in the same amount of memory loss in different people. So we can ask the question, what's accounting for the differences? So here's 2 brains, and here's somebody with no dementia, and here's somebody with dementia. Can you tell the difference between them? It's a trick question. It's the same slide. It's just turned it upside down, so it looks different. Very good. 3 neurons for you. We're going to auction off the extra neurons when we're done. So why do some people with AD pathology in the brain have dementia and others don't? Wouldn't you like to know the answer to that? You'll have to come back next month. No. So let's talk about that. So the first thing is, remember, Alzheimer's disease in older people often exists in the brain with other pathologies. So the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. It makes a huge difference in your memory if you get Alzheimer's changes in your brain and you also happen to have some strokes. You also happen to have some Lewy bodies, or hippocampal sclerosis, or TDP, because all of these things cause memory loss. So 2 of them is worse than 1, and 3 of them is worse than 2. And so we want to actually prevent all of these things, not just Alzheimer's disease. So let's look at some factors that make your brain more vulnerable. And we already dispensed with the genetic factors, which you're not going to change. There's medical factors, there's psychological factors, and there's experiential factors. And some of these factors are in your past. So they are what they are. And I'm not going to go into them in too much detail. Some of them are somewhat obvious, I think. Diabetes causes strokes. Strokes contributes to AD dementia. Treat your diabetes, treat your hypertension, treat your anemia. I'm going to show you some data occasionally. One of the things that we do is we put a little device on people's wrist called an actigraph. They wear it for 10 days. This is 10 days of recording. And it's set so every 15 seconds for 10 days, it records how active that person was. Actually, how active the left wrist was. And we'll come back and talk about physical activity. But I want you to notice here, from about midnight until about 6 in the morning, do you notice how there's much less activity here? What do you think that is? Sleep. Good. I like you guys. I think we're going to get along just fine. Sleep. Now, look real closely between these guys and these guys over here. Do you notice a difference between those 2 groups? What do you notice on the left side? What? Not sleeping too well. Very good. Do I get to give you guys grades at the end? I know you're going to rate me. You better do a good job. So actually what we did was we took these little bins. So here's 7 days. And here we just blow out a 12-hour period. And you can see this activity in this person and this person. And so what you have is runs of no activity, and then bloop, there's activity, and then a run of no activity. And the no activity, of course, is sleep. And the activity is, I can't tell you that the person was awake. I can only tell you the person was moving. And we call this rest activity fragmentation. And it turns out that the more activity you have at night, the more your sleep is interrupted, the less consolidated your sleep, the greater your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. Oh my God. This is not for the data I just showed you. It's just to remind me what's coming next. So we're going to talk about some psychological factors that are associated with increased vulnerability. So one is depressive symptoms. They tend to all be downers, which is why I throw that slide in. Depressive symptoms. This is not depression, major depression, where you treat it. This is people's kind of personality trait. You know, think about people you know. Some of them are kind of on the happy side of life, and others just seem to be, no. How you doing? Not well. Everything was an effort. My sleep was restless. Of course your sleep is restless. Felt sad, could not get going. Sometimes people tell me, well, this could be a consequence of getting Alzheimer's disease. Well, it's not. Here's people that developed Alzheimer's disease, here's people that didn't, and this is their depression, and there's not that much change. So there's something about depression that's very stable. It's what we call trait-like. It's something about you. You know who you are when I talk about these things. Here's one of my favorites. Neuroticism. This is the disposition to experience psychological distress. So this is not how much stress is actually on you. This is how you react to stress. So again, think about people you know. I'm very careful not to say think about your friends, because I don't really know your friends yet. But think about people you know, and you know that some of them can deal really well with stress. And others seem to just decompensate the first thing that goes wrong. This proneness to being distressed. I'm a worrier. I feel tense and jittery. I get angry, feel helpless when someone else decides my problems. This is very strongly associated with your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease, clinically. None of these things are related to the pathology that I showed you. These are all related to whether or not you lose memory and can get labeled with a clinical syndrome that we call Alzheimer's disease. Anxiety, chronic anxiety. Similar to distress, slightly different. I wish I could be happy, as others seem to be. I feel like a failure. I get in a state of turmoil as I think about my concerns. Same thing, associated with Alzheimer's dementia. Harm avoidance. It's a trait associated with a tendency to avoid new situations and diverse stimuli. It's not you, you're here. Anybody here for the first time? So it could be you. I'm sorry. I've been traveling a lot. I think I told you, I haven't seen my wife in a long time, as she likes to remind me. 4 subscales. This is a little bit more complicated. I'm not showing you items now. Anticipatory worry, fear of uncertainty, shyness, fatigability. Loneliness is another one. Loneliness. This is a self-perceived sense of social isolation. This is not how many people in your email, Facebook, Twitter accounts. All right, lonely people often have very long lists of those, all right, but they don't feel connected to other people. And lonely people are at risk of Alzheimer's dementia. General sense of emptiness. I miss having people around. I don't feel like I have enough friends. I often feel abandoned. I miss having a real good friend. This is this sense of loneliness, self-perceived social isolation. And it could be lost in a crowd, okay? Negative social interactions. You've never had those, have you? 4 domains, neglect or rejection by others, others' unwanted intrusion or advice. I figure since you came, you wanted my advice, and I wasn't intruding, but it just occurred to me. Failure by others to provide help, being unsympathetic or insensitive. So these negative social interactions, also associated with memory loss, cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's dementia. So those were the negative ones. Let's move on to some positive things. So here are things that decrease brain vulnerability, makes your brain more resilient. Whew. And we'll talk about medical factors again, diet, psychological factors, and experiential factors. And again, I won't talk about all of these, but I will talk about diet. So there is something called a DASH diet. Have you ever heard of that? And a Mediterranean diet. So this is adherence to diet. Tertiles means that we take the group, we divide it into 3 equal groups. And so the people that adhere to this DASH diet more decline slower. And the people that adhere to the Mediterranean diet more also decline slower. And I know what your next question is. What are those diets? On the left is the DASH diet, and the right is the Medi diet. And I'll give you a few moments to study that. Okay, so grains, vegetables, more good stuff, less bad stuff. Tells you how to score it. Do you recognize what you eat in there? Do you recognize what you shouldn't eat in there? Oh, good. Okay, they're also associated with the risk of Alzheimer's disease, so memory loss and Alzheimer's dementia. And then we also created something called the MIND diet. This one you haven't heard of, we just published it. And what is that? There you go. They're all kind of variations on a theme. Grains, leafy vegetables, fruit, less red meat. Mind diet. So diets are very difficult to interpret. Diets are a zero-sum game. Is the fish good for you? Really? Or is it that if you have 4 fish meals, you can't possibly be eating 5 meat meals? Well, some of you maybe could. I can't. Okay, so there we go. We're going to go to some happy things. I like happy things. I like to be happy. Any takers on happiness? Good. All right, so the first one, conscientiousness. Conscientiousness, this is the tendency to be self-disciplined and scrupulous. I'm quite certain, even though we just met, it describes each and every one of you. Is there anybody here who wants to volunteer for being undisciplined and unscrupulous? Okay, I'm a productive person who always gets the job done. I'm very active. I have a lot of intellectual curiosity. I strive for excellence in everything I do. Conscientious. It's good for you. More conscientiousness, less Alzheimer's dementia. Nothing to do with any of those pictures of what we find in the brain. Psychological well-being. This actually comes from the positive psychology literature, often attributed to Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, who said there's got to be something different about these people that were able to survive this horrific experience. So there's actually several different scales in there, but the ones that seem protective, one is purpose in life. This is the psychological tendency to derive meaning from life's experience, possess a sense of intentionality, and goal-directedness that guides your behavior. This is one little potent predictor. It predicts less death, less disability, less Alzheimer's disease, less cognitive decline, less memory loss. Whatever model we put it in, it's good for you. Please get some. Self-acceptance, positive attitude towards oneself. I've never been accused of lacking that. And autonomy, a sense of self-determination and independence. Well-being, psychological well-being. Participating in cognitively active activities. You're doing that tonight. I'll bet you guys do a lot of that. Is this the first time you've participated in something like this? Anything like this? No, okay. So I put this up. Viewing television? We don't ask them what shows they watch. All right. So cognitive activity is just information processing. Okay, and if you've seen people with Alzheimer's disease, certainly with moderate or severe Alzheimer's disease, even watching television becomes an activity that they cannot engage in. Of course, reading and playing games. Now I'm coming back to our actigraphy. That's the little device. So we talked about the sleep. Sleep was a bonus. We put it on to see how active people were. So it turns out we can assess cognitive activity, information processing, pretty well. It seems very complicated, but the range of things that we talk about are pretty similar. They have things in common, so it's not so hard to capture that. It turns out physical activity is very difficult, because when you talk about physical activity, a lot of people think of exercise. You think of exercise, all right? But today, I did exercise this morning. But then I had to walk all over this campus, back and forth, several times. That's exercise too. But we often don't think of those kinds of things. Yard work is exercise. I've seen people wash dishes. That looks like exercise. Given a choice between that and going to the dentist, it's really difficult. So the more physically active you are, the lower your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. And since the device is on the left wrist, it's important that you shake your left wrist more than anything else. So social activities. Go to restaurants, sporting events, bingo. Day trips, community volunteer work, visiting people, participating in senior groups, social clubs, coming to things like this. This isn't just a cognitive activity. A minute ago, you got some physical activity, all right? And it's a social activity also. It's a social activity if you came with someone, okay? But we're engaged in a social activity. We're socializing, so to speak. 1 on 150. I'm watching. There's something about engaging in other people, engaging with other people, all right? So again, this isn't the opposite of loneliness. It's a different kind of activity. And if you think about it, what is it that we have done throughout history, okay, short of stoning somebody to death, okay, the most egregious thing that we can do to somebody who violated social norms is to isolate them, to ban them from the community, to put them in social isolation, all right? We go nuts when we're by ourselves. I mean, there's times when you'd like a little alone time, but we are social beings by very nature. We live in social groups. We survive in social groups. It's hard for human beings to make it in the world all by themselves. Here's another interesting thing. This is life space. Life space. I love this construct. So, anybody been out of town lately? Like out of California? Out of town, out of your neighborhood? Getting into your neighborhood, off your yard or lawn, beyond your porch or patio, beyond your bedroom. Think of people that you know that have gotten old and frail, maybe with or without Alzheimer's disease, and their life space starts to collapse on them. Okay, and some people can end up life not getting beyond their own bedroom. So we score this inversely. So 0 is not constricted, 6 is bedroom bound, and having a larger life space reduces your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. So you might look at that and say, well, I have a larger life space, I have more social activity, more cognitive, more physical. We can control for all of that. I've just shown you that data. We have it in the same people. there's something about live space. Now, I have it as an experiential factor. Some of these things, I gotta put it someplace, all right? Maybe it's a drive to get out there. You know, maybe something about you. I want to engage in my world. Maybe we're capturing something like that. Either way, it's potently protective. Social networks. The number of relatives, besides spouses and children, I'll come back to spouses and children in a minute, other friends that they see each month and you feel close to. Again, not the number of people in your email, Twitter, Facebook, but people that you can really talk to. To give you a sense, you know, the average is about 7. So this isn't just acquaintances. I can't suddenly add 150 people to my social network. Although, do we have their emails? Don't give them mine. I'm kidding, you can have my email. You know, be at ease and talk to about private matters. Okay, again, this is not the same as loneliness, okay? You can alleviate loneliness with one good friend. One good friend, okay? But this is something different. A lot of friends, and I'm just going to talk about this for a minute. We create what are called meta memories. So when you see somebody that you know, you don't have to run through the reels of, I met this person, and this is what happened, and this is what he did, and blah, 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 okay? You just have this idea of the person, and you can use that immediately, all right, to match with the behaviors. Think of times when people have done things that you thought were out of character. Like, I wouldn't have expected that person would do that, all right? And so it's really hard to keep track of large social networks and really understand them. Spouses and children work both ways. Good relationships are good. Shall I leave it at that? You can fill in the rest. So, where does that take us? It takes us to building a better brain as we age. We got there so fast and had so much fun on the way. So, that's me. This is my grandmother. This is about 10 years ago. These are my 2 kids. This is the artiste. This is the kid that complained incessantly about the gap between his teeth. And my grandmother lived at a retirement facility, and I would visit her, and we called her Gigi for great grandma. So Gigi, how everything? Oh, fine. She'd say, so David. Huh? What, Gigi? You still working on that Alzheimer stuff? I said, yeah. She said, you getting anywhere? I said, we're making progress. And then she'd lean over and she'd point to a bunch of people in the facility and she'd say, you better hurry up. She was a wonderful woman. She got up every morning, got dressed, well, showered, got dressed, and she mapped out the longest route from her apartment to the lunchroom. So when we go from her apartment to the lunchroom, we could do it in either 3 minutes or 23 minutes. And so she mapped out the absolute longest route to go, and that's the one she took. And she went out for a walk each day. This is Chicago. This isn't Sacramento. All right, 90-some-odd-year-old woman, you know, walking out there in January in Chicago. Anyways, a robust lady. She was wonderful. So that brings us to the question that you came for. Can Alzheimer's disease be prevented? And the answer is so the answer is undoubtedly, unequivocally, yes, but perhaps not yet. But maybe yet, okay? These are all observational studies. We ask people questions, we follow them over time, and we see what happens. And we see things that increase risk and decrease risk, okay? I can't promise that I can take a couch potato, all right, put them on a treadmill for a couple of months and prevent Alzheimer's disease. When we ask these questions, we're getting into lifelong behavior patterns. All right, so I'm tapping into the kind of person they are, especially for the traits, but even for the experiential factors. If you are cognitively active, I suspect you've been cognitively active for a while. Maybe you picked up one of those games, okay? Not all those things are fun. I mean, my wife likes crossword puzzles. I'd rather do the dishes. And you know how much I like doing dishes. Okay, so I wish it was this simple. We're going to come back to this brain in a moment. Alan's brain. Okay, so building a better brain as we age. First, pick your parents well. Make sure you have good genes. Okay, I didn't talk about the early life stuff. Make sure you have good genes. Make sure your parents are educated, that you live in a nice and safe neighborhood, that they teach you a language and a musical instrument. And you'll be set in the beginning on a good course. Relax. Be happy. You only live once. Very few of you are going to live forever. I'd be very surprised if it's more than one or two. When I come back in 2115, I'm going to look for you. Really, chillax. Get a good night's sleep. If I get Alzheimer's disease, that is it. I don't know why I can't sleep. My wife keeps whacking me. Avoid people who are downers. Sometimes you can't, in which case just put your fingers in your ears and go, nah, 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 nah. But really, there's some people there that can really get under your skin. You know who they are. We're not naming names, but you know who they are. Control your vascular disease and vascular risk factors. What is good for your heart is good for your brain. All right? People that present with stroke die from heart disease. Hypertension, diabetes, cholesterol, good heart healthy. DASH is a heart healthy diet. Heart healthy, brain healthy. Eat a good diet, speaking of heart healthy. It doesn't have to be one of those. I'm a pescatarian. So all of those things that have eat less of this, I don't eat of. Don't eat of, I don't eat. Be diligent. Spend time engaged in meaningful, goal-directed activities. Find something meaningful and purposeful. A lot of you are working, a lot of you are retired, Some of you are raising children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews or taking care of pets or volunteering. Do things that are meaningful. It's good for you. Engage in regular cognitive, physical, and social activities. Well, you are. You all get a point for that. We all stood up, got a point for that. Say hello to the people next to you, introduce yourself, get another point. Introduce yourself to 2 people, 2 points. Strengthen and maintain social ties. You know, we live in a very, very busy world. That can be very hard. There's a lot of things pressing on our time. I love dogs. Get out, explore new things. Really, it's good for you. And even if you do all of this, according to the great demographer Groucho Marx, growing old is something you do if you are lucky. Groucho was born in the late 1800s, at a time when many people did not get old. He did. The great brain doctor, David Bennett. Why is his mustache not gray? What the heck? It's so unfair, but I have more hair. Getting old without dementia is something you do if you're lucky. So we can engage in all of these things, but if you get old, who would like to get old? Older. We can, older. I want to be 90. Not tomorrow, but sometime in the future, okay? But if I go to 90, my chances of getting Alzheimer's disease do go up. Now, I didn't talk about this, but Alzheimer's disease is a disease of women. Do you know that? It's a disease of women. 6 out of 10 people with Alzheimer's disease are women. Men have a protective factor. You know what it is? We die. I heard that. We die young. And if you die without Alzheimer's disease, you don't get it, men. When women, women's lib, and they got the right to smoke, women, we want to die like a man. So you still need a little bit of luck. Well, you cannot pick your parents. That one's off the chart. But almost everything else I talked about is up to you. So this is Alan, a young man. My son Josh made this picture. Teenager. And there he is with a spare brain under his arm. What a lucky kid. And, teenagers often behave as if they have a spare brain. Okay? Either that or teenagers behave as if they have one brain, but it's in the box. And we're on this road. And we want to get old. And if you're old already, you want to get older. You have one brain. It is in your head. Please take care of it. Thank you very much.
I've got an idea.
You have an idea?
An idea. And it doesn't relate to anything you've talked about, and I appreciate everything you've done. Fantastic. However, you're looking under the wrong rocks.
Okay.
I think what the problem is, it's a deficiency in what we eat. And I'll use an example. I'm going to use cobalt for the purposes of this explanation. Let's say that cobalt, 100% of it, is necessary for the cells in the brain, memory cells. Let us say that cobalt that we eat is only 99.2%. There's an 0.8% deficiency. Now that deficiency carries on to the next cell division, and it keeps multiplying. And over many, many, many years, the brain cells sooner or later become totally deficient, and Alzheimer's is the result.
Is there a question in here coming up?
It's a statement.
Oh, okay.
And what I'm trying to say is that Alzheimer's is not a disease because there's no pathogen, and I can't give it to you. That's the definition of a disease, is there's a pathogen. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's not a definition of a disease. Definition of what you described is a communicable disease or a contagious disease. Most diseases we don't pass from one person to another. There are some dementias that you can pass from one person to another. I think we should not unturn any rock in our search for a treatment and prevention for Alzheimer's disease. So if there's another rock we should be looking under, let's pick it up and shine a light there.
I'd like you to comment, continuing with the diet, can you comment on the book, The Grain Brain and the Grain Brain Diet, and that whole philosophy of staying away from grains and carbohydrates?
I can comment on published medical literature on diets. I tend not to read the popular books on diets or activities or any of that stuff. So I cannot comment on that. I mean, so inflammation is a topic of great interest for a very long period of time. When people think about underlying mechanisms of aging, inflammation has been one. Something called oxidative stress has been another. These go back decades, all right? And there's reasons to think that some of what you eat may be pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, and you can go to websites and pull up the nutrition, and they show you little charts. I'm trying to figure out how many calories are in them, and you're staring at this chart, 307 pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. So there are these ideas out there, all right, but getting them into a rigorous intervention, let alone, or a rigorous even observational study, let alone intervention, is difficult. I think if you look at the various diets, find the things, if it says eat more of those. There are a lot of grains, there is a lot of olive oil, and if it says eat less than, try and eat less of that. So, and it's not clear to me that which of these diets is actually better than the other.
If you work graveyard, will it affect the rest, sleeping?
Oh my God, yes, graveyard shift. If you work graveyard shift, will it affect your sleeping? Shift workers are at very high risk of all kinds of chronic conditions. All right, so when you're working out of cycle with the sun, which is what sets your biologic clock, did you know that every cell in your body has a clock? I didn't get to talk about it. I only had an hour. We have clocks. We have clock genes. We have genes that control our clock. Our master clock is a part of the brain that's entrained by the light and dark cycles. And that clock sets all the other clocks. Now, the clocks aren't set to the same time because different parts of your body are in different phases with the clock. So the clock has a master clock, and then all the other clocks are set to it. If you travel a couple hours to the east, like I have to do tomorrow, my clock will be off. Okay, it won't take very long to reset. If you travel 6 or 8 hours to the east, it takes a long time to drag that clock back in order. It's called jet lag, all right? But circadian dysrhythms is associated with a whole host of cardiovascular risk factors. So we've shown that just dysrhythmicity of your circadian rhythms, and people who work graveyard shift, people who work night shifts, especially if they work, we're killing our nurses. 3 days night shift, and then they're off the rest of the week trying to get their clock back, and then they're working at night again. All right, that's really drives your brain wacky. All right, and so people that have those kind of shifts are actually get the metabolic syndrome, and they get more cardiovascular disease and diabetes and all kinds of things. And yet a lot of those jobs are needed. Yeah, it can be bad.
In California, we have a bill that's going to help Alzheimer's and dementia. What happens is someone goes into the hospital, has a stroke, and they're released to their family physician and never see a neurologist. And all of a sudden they have symptoms that are not normal aging things. And so they go to the family physician and he says, oh, you're fine, there is nothing wrong. Well, there's a bill right now that's been passed through one committee that will make training for primary care physicians to look for these signs of dementia and Alzheimer's. So I hope it passes.
I hope it passes. At the end of the day, the way the whole reimbursement system works in the United States, unless you can tie it to a robust therapy, okay, it's a lot of doctors just don't want to get into it, all right, because it's very time consuming, and in the end, they don't have all the answers, and we don't have all the prescriptions.
Question that about since women get Alzheimer's more, and like I said, it's in my family, but what about the change of life, the hormones? Does that have?
Yeah, so I didn't have a chance to talk about everything, but it turns out that surgical menopause is actually associated with memory loss, and it's actually one of the few things that's directly related to some of the pathologies that we've measured in the brain. Surgical menopause, and it appears that it can be partly alleviated by hormone replacement therapy, at least in an observational study. Otherwise, menopause and manopause can be associated with a host of things.
The participants in your long-term studies, when they were determined to be Alzheimer's free, was that through brain scans, and do you do them as they progress through the longitudinal studies? Do you think we're going to do more of those just in the general population, or because there's not a prevention yet, is it just that we don't need to know?
So in my studies in particular, I go to groups like this, and at the end, I ask for their brains. And as you saw, we have over 3,000 people. I've gotten quite good at it. Maybe next time, they'll ask me to try it out on you. That said, we say we're looking for people that don't have dementia. We make them go through a few hoops, all right, in order to sign up, which makes us confident that they don't at least have moderate to severe dementia, but we don't test them until after they're in the study, okay? And for a lot of old people, they do not want to know, all right? So I don't tell them unless they ask.